Desperado. What is going on, alpha males? Thought maybe I'd open by singing you guys a little bit of a song there. Probably familiar with Desperado. But whatever you call them, a desperado, a wanderer, a rambler, a term that I like, a stranger and a pilgrim on the earth, or a neo-nomad. That's what we're going to talk about today as I live that kind of existence. What's it like? What's it all about? That's what we're going to talk about today on Alpha Male Podcast. The podcast where we talk about what it means to be a man, the right way, with God at the center. Made in His image, strong, dominant, and in control. And we don't apologize for that. I reckon I should put in the bio, even if only a short one, to give you guys kind of an idea of my background before I get into how I live now as a neo-nomad and what that's all about. If it is appealing to any of you guys. Or maybe it's not. Maybe you want nothing to do with it, but you just want to kind of know what it's like. The trials and tribulations and the great blessings as well. I thought I'd share a little bit of my life, our life, as I'm married, with you, the audience, the tribe. Bio. First and foremost, I am a Christian. That is number one in my life, serving God, following Jesus. Combat veteran, served in the United States Marine Corps and the Army. Also law enforcement veteran, private contractor, state rifle and pistol champion. Professional big game hunter and guide. If you feel called to support, check out Patreon. There should be a link in the show notes. With that, I am your host, Michael Milito, and I am blessed to serve you today. Okay, so that's a pretty short version of the bio. Obviously, there's a lot that's not in there. I joined the Marine Corps at 17, and I've kind of been moving around ever since. I've been to 48 out of the 50 states, just missing Alaska and Hawaii, I do believe. Don't really have any desire to go to Hawaii unless there's some reason to, and plan on going to Alaska by God's grace pretty soon if He wills it. But all the other 48 states, and I've been around the world too, but let's just talk about domestically. And I've lived in a big chunk of those states. I've lived in many, many of those states. Sometimes for years, sometimes for months, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for days. In fact, in just the last year, I believe, lived in, not just been to, I've been to many, but lived in, I don't know if it's exactly a year, but since we started our last loop, lived in Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, the Mid-Atlantic Tidewater area, Idaho, Nebraska, Florida, South Dakota, Idaho, and Montana, and we're gearing up to go to Alaska again by God's grace pretty soon. And that's just this year, but I've lived all over. When I joined the Marine Corps, they sent me to California. Not really where I wanted to go, but it did get me out of the small town where I grew up. But I've kind of bounced around, as you might know. But here's the way I like to put it. Strangers and pilgrims on the earth, right? Because our basis for everything, our basis for life should be the Bible. For we are all strangers and pilgrims on the earth. This earth is not my home. It is but a temporary stop. It is but a temporary dwelling. This body of mine is but a temporary dwelling. Don't get too attached to these things here. They're all fleeting. We are all strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they declared plainly that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For if they had been mindful of the country from whence they came, they may have been permitted to return. But as it were, they sought a better country, a heavenly country, where God would not be ashamed to be called their God, for He has prepared for them a city. You'll find that in Hebrews. Forgive me, I forget which exact verse that is. But thanks to search engines, you can probably find it if you want to look it up. Memorize it yourself. We are all strangers and pilgrims on the earth. I hope that I have the wisdom to know where God wants me to go and the courage and strength to go there and walk it out, wherever that is. Stranger and a pilgrim on the earth, a neo-nomad. There are nomadic cultures all over the world, throughout history. They're not too common here in America in 2023 to be kind of a new pioneer, a new neo-nomad. But there are some of us. I've met quite a few along the way. And I think especially with a lot of people going remote after COVID, it may be more common. And maybe you're thinking about it because you have the opportunity where you could live as a nomad. Well, I guess first let's tackle you should do what God tells you to do when He tells you to do it. But assuming it's okay with Him, it's certainly okay with me. Let's talk about logistics. I have lived before out of a vehicle. I've lived before out in the woods in the poncho hooch. But in general, either in a vehicle or in a camper for several years now. The wife and I have lived in a camper. That's what we do. We have a 21 foot, I think from end to end, it's like 17 feet inside. It's huge compared to the back of a Hummer, which is what I lived in for a time in the past. It's like 150 square feet. It's giant. But it's actually quite small for a camper, and a big chunk of it is our gym. We have a home gym, so that's part of the logistics. Like, we both like to stay in shape and work out, and there's not always a gym around, so we carry our own with us. We have a pretty legit set of weights, dumbbells, plates, a squat rack, a bench press, all those kind of things. We carry the camper. We haul it with a truck. Before that, it was the Hummer. The Hummer made several trips across country, and sadly, it drove its last mile in Nebraska. At least the last mile that I was ever going to drive it, because we were stuck in the middle of the country, and I was trying to get my wife back to her family for Thanksgiving in Michigan. Oh yeah, we lived in Michigan. I forgot that one. Completely forgot that. I'm not a big fan of east of the Mississippi, but forgive me, I forgot about Michigan. I lived in Michigan this last year as well. I was trying to get my wife back to Michigan to be with her family during Thanksgiving. And we broke down in Kearney, Nebraska, and it was getting close to the time, and it was not a simple fix. I'm not the greatest mechanic. I'm not the worst mechanic, but it was more than a simple belt or a hose or anything like that. It needed some serious work, and something I couldn't fix on the side of the road. So I sold the Hummer, and we bought the truck. Now we have an F-150, an older F-150. Some rust and body damage and stuff like that, but she runs, by God's grace, really well. So we haul that around. A big chunk of living nomadically, when I decided to give this a shot doing the podcast full time, is to save on rent, right? Especially if you're out west, you can stay on BLM land for up to 14 days at a time. And that's, like, you as an American citizen, that's your land. You're part owner of that land. Why not take advantage of that? It's beautiful and it's free. And I don't mean free as in monetary. I mean free as in freedom. Fresh air, mountains and streams and beauty, from the desert to the mountains to rolling hills to the prairie. It's beautiful, beautiful land. God makes so many beautiful places. Where was I? The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows us His handiwork. I was talking logistics. So we haul the camper around. We live in the camper, except for when I do stints where I just want to be alone out in the wilderness, in which case I'll just live out in the wilderness. So we haul the camper around. We have a small generator. So some people say you're not off-grid if you have a generator, or you're not off-grid if you whatever. But off-grid is a sliding scale, right? There's times when we haul water up from a creek, from a river, and pour it in our camper or use it for water. There's times when we can connect to well water or even city water on a hose. Is that off-grid if I don't have electricity or I'm not, Off-grid is a sliding scale. If I have solar, am I really off-grid since I use electricity? You get the idea. But we have a small generator that we keep inside the camper. You can generally, if you don't care about having electricity on all the time and you are diurnal, you sleep at night and are awake during the day, you can run the generator for a little bit and charge it enough to run the lights for a little bit when you need it, and you don't need as much power. And me as a podcaster, I don't even really need service that often. I can go to a local library. Again, that's government funded, that's part yours. I can go to a library or, treat myself to a couple dollar cup of coffee so I'm not a freeloader, and quickly, if they have good internet, upload a bunch of content and then leave again. So pretty easy for me. And my wife is a little bit different. My wife still has one of those fancy big city corporate jobs, although she works remote. She's pretty high up on a company level for a big company, got her master's degree. Very smart, very beautiful. I'm very blessed to be married to her. A great gift from God. But her logistics are a little bit more complicated because she needs really good high-speed internet, good enough to do video conference calls. That's a big part of her job, is video conferencing and video calls, which requires a lot more internet than I need. So what we generally do is, a lot of times we'll go on a Sunday, we rest on Sabbath, right? So we rest on Sabbath. And if we're going to a new place where I have never lived before, we've never been before, we'll go scout it out, and then we'll spend Sunday doing our chores and errands and finding a place where she can work from the week. Some libraries have really nice little rooms where you can do video conferencing and stuff. Some libraries don't. Sometimes there'll be a university there with facilities and library. Sometimes she'll have to find a good coffee shop with like a little nook where she can work. And then she'll have her plan for the week on where she will go. And generally she'll go during the day and she'll work from there and then come home at night to the camper. We're doing it with 2 vehicles for a while, but in an effort to save money and resources, we went down to 1 vehicle. So we both share the truck and we have a bike, and then we'll take turns doing that. If one of us needs the truck, they take the truck and we work it out. It works out just fine. And when it's time to move, we hook up the camper, we haul the camper, whether it's BLM land or a reasonably priced campground. Some campgrounds are pretty good. In the city we're at right now in northern Idaho, which is just so beautiful. The city we're in now, they'll let you stay for up to a certain amount of days in the city park for free. And then if you want to, you can pay. And it's very reasonable to stay for however long you want to stay hooked up to even use their electricity. So that's pretty cool. That's just one example. Like when I was in the Black Hills, I literally just stayed on BLM land in the beautiful Black Hills of South Dakota. When we were in Oregon last year on the Oregon coast before they passed that, crazy... We really liked Oregon and liked the Oregon coast. This was before they passed that crazy gun legislation, which kind of took Oregon out of the running for places we want to live. We're actually looking for land there. Then they passed that crazy gun legislation that very much seems like, to me, an infringement on shall not be infringed. So we left there. But while we were there and kind of looking for land, we stayed on the side of riverbanks on BLM land on dirt roads. Beautiful. Just beautiful. So it really kind of depends. There's a lot less of that when you get east of the Missouri, say east of the Mississippi, but now I think east of the Missouri River is even more reasonable for the kind of places that we like to stay and like to live. But that's the logistics. If it's like an emergency, like literally we had to bug out once because of a legit wildfire emergency evacuation, we could be gone in 10 minutes. But if we're taking our time so stuff doesn't go everywhere and we're setting the weights on the ground so they don't fall over and strapping down the Berkey water filter and things like that, 30 minutes to an hour. Get everything hooked up and backed up and the trailer hitch hooked up, and then we're in the camper and we're good to go. I should mention propane, especially living off-grid. Propane is a really good thing to have. Is it truly off-grid if you have propane? I would say yeah. But a 5-pound propane bottle, if we're not running the heat a lot, it's been over a month since I filled our propane. Well over a month. And we have a 5-gallon tank and we're still going strong on it. For cooking, for things like that, propane is a great thing to have if you're living off-grid or living as a nomad. It's a great resource. And a small, handy, lightweight, quiet generator is really, really nice to have. There are other ways that you can do it. You could just get a little pull-behind trailer that's not a legit camper. You could get a van. A lot of people do vans. A lot of people do schools, the schoolies, the school buses. I can see a real advantage to that. I could also see some disadvantages. But a van, if you don't need or want a gym and you're not carrying all your possessions with you, like we live tiny, we live small. My wife has some of her childhood stuff at her mom's house, or there's some stuff there, some stuff that we maybe leave at her mom's house, but very little, right? We live small, everything that we own. And we both downgraded and got rid of a lot of stuff to live this way. And it's not the stuff that we miss. Even living in this, 150 square feet, a lot of times we're like, how do we get so much stuff? We say that all the time. Why do we have so much stuff? We have far more than we need. Far more than we need. The abundance of a man's life does not consist in the things that he possesses. From Luke 12:15, and he said unto them, take heed, and keep yourself from all covetousness. For a man's life consists not in the abundance of things which he possesses. Or the New King James, and he said to them, take heed and beware of covetousness. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of things he possesses. But we have what we have, and we have far more than we need. We're blessed. We're very blessed. Like if we're not happy in life, if we're having a bad day, it's almost certainly not because we don't have a thing or a widget or an Amazon thing, right? That's just not generally how it goes. Now you need stuff in life. You need, we need gas, gasoline, food, because as much as I like to hunt and fish and forage, and we do supplement a bit of our diet with hunting and fishing and foraging because of government regulations and malum prohibitum, and the government declaring that the fish and the birds and the mammals and whatever belong to them, and you must pay them a fee and get their permission at certain times of the year to take those animals and live off those animals. They have decreed that, so that takes out a big chunk of that. So we forage and stuff when we can, but a lot of times, especially one of the things about living as a nomad is that you're not really a resident of anywhere. So hunting in those places and even fishing in those places can get really, really expensive to the point where it doesn't make financial sense to hunt. It used to be when I was growing up, you hunted for food and to put meat on the table. But when it's thousands of dollars for a tag to shoot an animal, and I'm not putting down sport hunting. I was a professional big game hunter and guide, but I don't hunt for horns. In fact, unless my mom saved some from deer I shot when I was a kid, from all the giant beasts I've ever killed and all the exotic animals I've ever killed, I have exactly 0 horns hanging up. I have exactly 0 antlers. I did keep 1 horn from my wife's sheep when I was blessed to take her on our first big game hunt for sheep. And we got one, and I kept 1 horn because I wanted to make a shofar out of it, to blow the shofar. And I messed it up, so I got rid of that. I don't even have that anymore. So I hunt for the meat. It doesn't make financial sense to hunt and fish if you do it legally because the government makes it prohibitively too expensive in many places. So one of the reasons we want to try Alaska, especially Southeast Alaska, it seems like one of the places where you can legally, poaching is a different story, but legally get a big chunk of your calories naturally, legally, by hunting and fishing and foraging off the land. You could do it in Oregon and Idaho, where I am in northern Idaho. The population density is super low and there's an abundance of game, but again, because of malum prohibitum, because of regulations, have to have permission and pay a bunch of money to what I would consider a lot of money to hunt mammals and fish and things like that. But we do, thankfully, most places don't require a license or anything to forage, so we do forage quite a bit. I was just out yesterday foraging cattails, but my wife, who, I guess we should go on a diet. I pretty much eat the same thing I've eaten for years and years. Long before I remember the term keto being a thing, I live on a high-fat, high-protein diet. A lot of eggs, a lot of peanut butter, a lot of 100% cocoa, coconut oil, meat, right? That's what I would consider a good diet. My wife eats a more traditional diet. She even eats some sweets, as in fruit. I don't generally eat fruit. But we'll go out and forage a lot of blackberries, a lot of different kind of berries. She really likes thimbleberries, but blackberries, thimbleberries, huckleberries, cherries, plums, apples, those things grow in abundance, especially out west in the wild if you know where to look, more than you could get and eat in most places. So we do quite a bit of foraging. That helps, that supplements a diet, but you don't have to do that if you live as a neo-nomad. Don't think that you have to be like John the Baptist out living on locust and wild honey, unless you want to. I don't think you're required to have a tag for locust anywhere that I'm aware of. And they are clean per Leviticus 11, so cha-ching, there you go. But diet, we don't generally eat out very much unless my wife's very sweet and she's very simple like me. But every once in a while, she likes to go out. I think since we've been in Idaho and we've been here a couple of months, she wanted to go out to taste some local wine. So we went down and went to a nice fancy restaurant so that she could try some of the local wine. But in general, we don't eat out. We make our own food. We especially if it's like a road trip day. My wife thinks it's hilarious to say, oh yay, we get road trip snacks. And for me, a road trip snack is literally the same things that I eat all the time. I just eat them in the truck. So it's a road trip snack. Like raw eggs and cocoa powder or whatever it is that I have a hankering for. A bunch of peanut butter. But I figure your diet's pretty much going to be your diet. That really doesn't have to change that much living as a nomad. We are also preppers and survivalists. We don't apologize for that. And we keep quite a bit of emergency food stored. And it is not that hard to store months worth of food if you are wise about your choices. And you go with like high fat, high calorie intake foods that store well. Like the year before last, for my birthday, people asked when they asked what I wanted for my birthday, I said peanut butter, and I got 90-something pounds of peanut butter. And we've gotten plenty more since then. We eat that all the time as part of our diet, but as far as it's a good example of what is easy to store. A 5-gallon bucket of peanut butter has a lot of calories. Okay, let's get into some of the challenges of living as a neo-nomad, a stranger and a pilgrim. We got into laws. Laws are not always friendly. We started with the hunting and fishing. That can be crazy expensive if you're not a resident. So there's that. Many things like that can be quite a hassle. And the whole idea of being a resident of one certain state is kind of weird to us because we honestly don't really live anywhere. If some states require you to live in the state for more than 6 months to be a resident, then we are not a resident. So what do we do? To be honest, we have driver's licenses in states before we became a nomad. But what are you supposed to do when you don't live in a state for more than a couple of months? Per their own rules, you can't be a resident in many places. So that's a challenge, right? That is a challenge. Also, what about mail? It's pretty hard to get mail living as a nomad. It can be done. I try and stay out of big cities, and I mean by big cities, like a city big enough to have an Amazon locker. But if you do have to go in a city that big to have an Amazon locker, that is like a solution. I fought off Amazon. I resisted it for a long time. But living as a nomad, the Amazon locker thing is nice if you need to get mail. If you know where you're going to be, by God's grace, you have a plan for a couple of days ahead. You can order something and pick it up in an Amazon locker, assuming everything goes well. So mail is a challenge. A lot of times, talking about my wife's mom, will have important mail sent there. And as you guys probably know, a lot of mail is junk mail, and you don't need it. It's not important, but some mail is important, and that can be a challenge. Another big challenge is registration, right? Where do you register your vehicle? We ran into a giant problem. As I said, the vehicle we had broke down in Nebraska, so we had to sell it and buy a truck in Nebraska. But we had to get on the road. We couldn't register it in Nebraska because we didn't live in Nebraska. We had no address in Nebraska. We brought it to Florida. Trying to register it in Florida was a giant pain because we didn't actually live in Florida. We didn't have Florida driver's licenses. What we're going to do, take the truck and drive it all the way to Arizona or Nevada to register it? I mean, just stuff like that can be a real pain in the butt. The system is not really built for nomads. And a lot of that stuff can be a real pain. The stuff like that, stuff like mail, those kind of logistics, that can be a challenge. Again, the system is not really made for the nomad. I don't know what percentage of the population lives as nomads, but I don't think it's very high, and I don't think states and federal government are bending over to help you out with that. Also on taxes. What do you do on taxes, right? You got to go to a CPA and be honest with them. And, what a weird question that you get asked as a nomad. Where do you live? Like, you mean like this week? I lived up in that patch of woods up there in those mountains. Where do you live? Like, wherever I am today. That's a strange question for a nomad, and it's a question that we often joke about. Like, where are you from? Where do you live? I don't know. Like, today, this week, here. Tomorrow, somewhere else. So when it comes time to do taxes, you got to be honest with that. Like, I've been wanting to make the podcast a nonprofit. I consider it a ministry. I've been trying to make it like a 401 C3 or whatever it falls under as far as a tax and CPA, but that's hard to do anyway, especially as a nomad. Like, so that's one of the big reasons. Hopefully, by God's grace, He'll show us where we can live and maybe look for a small piece of land. Even if we don't live there full time, even if we live a semi-nomadic existence and have a little piece of land, it might make it more possible to have a headquarters, let's say, and start a nonprofit. But stuff like that can be a real challenge. Also on the challenges, showers, right? I enjoy a nice hot shower as much as the next guy, but I will often bathe in a cold creek or a stream. That's just the thing. Also, we have a thing called One Pass. We also have before that Gym Pass, but kind of a pass that lets you use different gyms if we're in an area that has a gym. Like the last place we were, there was really no gym anywhere around, but this time we're in what I would consider a giant metropolis of 25,000 people. And there's a gym there we can go. And we work out there. We're into fitness. But we can also shower there, so that's something nice. But oftentimes it's literally jumping in a river or a creek. There's nothing wrong with that. If we are staying at one of the campgrounds or something, sometimes they have showers. But that can be a challenge. There's a lot of things like that you probably wouldn't think about that are a challenge unless you actually lived as a nomad. Let's talk about some of the benefits of living as a nomad. Freedom. Right? I consider freedom a really important thing. It's a very, at least to me, free lifestyle. If I don't like a city or an area, I can leave. I can just pick up and leave. That's a great blessing. Also, a big reason my wife wanted to do this, especially for several years, is that a lot of people do this when they retire, like when they get 60 or 70, or they have these plans to do it when they get much older. But I think a lot of times that doesn't happen. Like, you can't see the future. You don't know what the future holds. We're not guaranteed another day. Every breath that I have is a gift from God. And God willing, I'll live to be 120 years old, and maybe I'll live in one place for more than 2 years. But I don't know that for sure. So doing it now, there's an appeal to that. Also, it's very freeing to have less stuff, right? Having less stuff. There was a time, if you've heard my testimony, you know that I once had like a big house in the California hills, and had a bunch of stuff. Had a giant house that I didn't need, that I didn't really like taking care of, that was kind of just a pain in my butt. I'm very blessed that I had a nice dry place to sleep, but my camper is a nice dry comfortable place to sleep. So it's very freeing in that way. Less stuff. And I'm not a hater of stuff. I like nice stuff. If you guys listen to Gunfighter Life, that's a whole other podcast I do. I like nice stuff. I have nice guns. But I'm not for having a giant gun collection that I don't use. I'm not opposed to nice stuff, but you get to a point where you get so much stuff that the stuff is taking away your freedom. You're spending time cutting grass instead of being out in the wilderness. Some people like cutting grass. Some people find it relaxing. I'm not that guy. I'm not one of those people, and I know that about myself. But you can get to a point in life where you have so much stuff that the stuff is kind of controlling your life instead of you controlling your stuff. And living as a nomad kind of keeps that down, right? If you have to be able to fit what you own mobily. Also, the travel. Getting to see this beautiful country, getting to see beautiful places. And maybe that's unique. Maybe not everybody is like that, because I've heard a lot of people say that they want to travel, but I don't know they actually want to travel. They like the idea of travel, but they don't like the down and dirty inconvenience of it. But for those that are called, that think they want to do that, there's nothing wrong with where I grew up. I grew up in a fine place, albeit I grew up a pretty poor boy in the South, but nothing wrong with the Tidewater, the Mid-Atlantic, the Southern, Southeast United States. Just, it doesn't really fit my personality type. And I may have never known that if I'd have spent my whole life there. I like wilderness. I like being able to walk around literally for days, weeks, months in the Nez Perce National Forest or Wilderness, Bitterroot Wilderness, Sawtooth, River of No Return Wilderness, and not seeing a single solitary person. Maybe not even seeing a sign that another human being had ever even been in that area. They probably have a long time ago, but I like that. That's good for my spirit, good for my soul. I, in general, don't like being east of the Mississippi River. Population density just too high. But I wouldn't have known that if I'd have spent my whole life like that. Getting to see different areas, different places, getting to live in the Black Hills, getting to live in northern Idaho, getting to live on the Oregon coast. Just beautiful, beautiful places. And getting to see all that. Maybe you're different than me. Maybe you decide, like, I spent a big chunk of our life in the desert Southwest, and I really like that. It's probably my second favorite area. Maybe you decide you really love the desert, and I do love the desert. Maybe you decide that's the place that you want to be. Like, I've lived in New Mexico. Maybe you decide like that culture, that food, that kind of geography, climate, demographics, that's your thing. You get to know that, right? You get to know that. And there's a place that you really don't want to live. You get to know that too. That's a great thing, and a big reason we wanted to do this is to see where we wanted to live and settle down. God has that plan for us to settle down and have children if we're blessed with that, and to have a little piece of land, and we're blessed with that. We might still live part of the year as neo-nomads, right? We might have like a base of operations. But we'll know where we want that to be, and hopefully God blesses that. But we're not just like, oh, we're going to live here because that's just where we grew up or ended up or whatever it is. That's a giant advantage. That's a giant thing. Also, just change. A change of environment. Change of scenery. That can be a great, great thing. And I mostly like the wilderness, and my wife's a good balance, right? Because you're so supposed to do both. Jesus did both. He went to the cities. He went out in the wilderness by himself. He went to a city. He went out in the wilderness by himself. And my wife likes being outside and hiking and stuff like that too, but she also enjoys the cities, the coffee shops, walking around a farmer's market. And you get to enjoy different cultures and different things. And we've been around the world too. Before we met, I've been around the world, a lot of places you probably wouldn't want to go, as you probably deduced from the bio, but getting to experience different cultures. Even here in the U.S., there's vastly different cultures, right? The culture in Central Florida is vastly different than the culture in Northern Arizona. Even though they're in the Southwest and right next to each other, kind of the culture of New Mexico is different than the culture of Arizona. And even a microcosm of that, like I'm big into guns, gun culture. Gun culture is a big thing. Like, I go to a farmer's, and I don't generally open carry. I think tactically it makes more sense to conceal carry. If I go to the little fair of the farmer's market here in northern Idaho, I expect to see people open carrying. If I go to Walmart here or in Arizona, I just expect to see people with guns on their hip. And I like that. Makes for a safer society, I think. And I like the gun culture, right? If I am conceal carrying, and I generally conceal carry a full-size fighting handgun, and somebody sees it, it's not a big deal, right? Whereas in Berkeley, California, even if I had a carry permit, if I was there, forget about all the gun laws, even if I had a legit carry permit and somebody saw it, it might be a big deal. It's not a big deal in Arizona. It's not a big deal in northern Idaho. Just that microcosm of the gun culture. The fact that I can just drive out even though we're what I would consider a giant metropolis here, 25,000 people, it's surrounded by wilderness and national forest. And I can drive out and go shooting. In fact, tonight, my wife and I, if God willing, we get to do some night training, we plan to go out and shoot at night up on the side of a mountain in the middle of the forest. And we can do that because of the area that we're in. Not everywhere is like that, trust me. I know. I'm not saying you have to love those same things. You might like an indoor shooting range with air conditioning and heat and set rules and a range safety officer. That's how you like to shoot. And I'm just focusing on shooting because that's a big part of what I do. But if you like that, you might like the Northeast, right? I've lived in the Northeast too. I lived in New Hampshire. You might decide you really like that, and you like the New England culture and the social aspect of New England and the food or whatever it is for you, right? That's kind of part of being the nomad, and one of the benefits of it. You get to see what you like and dislike. Do I want more government control? Do I want less government control? Do I want a bunch of government-funded programs? Do I kind of want a laissez-faire, hands-off? Right? Because the states are vastly different. The culture is vastly different. You may decide like Texas, right? You may decide you want kind of that kind of gun culture, but you also want really big cities with a lot of job opportunity and making a lot of money. If making a lot of money is really important to you. That's just an example. But you get to know that. You get to see how different parts of the country can be. And it's not the same when you just go visit it for a weekend and you stay in this touristy parts. Like, I had been to Las Vegas many times, but I lived in Las Vegas for quite a while. That's where I met my wife. It's kind of where we started this new chapter in our neo-nomadic existence. We lived there for quite a while. It's far different going there as a tourist and living in Las Vegas. And you get to see, because if you decide you want to live somewhere, you get to see what it's like to actually live in places. If you live there for more than a week or 2 weeks, or even a month especially, you get somewhere for a month and you really kind of get the feel of what it's like to live there and be there. Again, if you don't like it, you can try somewhere else and you can deduce from areas that you've been kind of the things that you like. And I guess that's another big thing, just talking out, being circumspect with you here, the audience, what I would consider the tribe. Right? You kind of get to know yourself better, what you like and what you don't like. There may be stuff out there you don't even know that you have a passion for because you've never experienced it. But you might experience it living as a neo-nomad. Podcast episodes are already running long. So, and again, this was kind of just freeform. I didn't even plan on doing this today until I had some errands to run and it popped into my head. And I thought, why not have this discussion with you here on the podcast? Kind of just sharing, being real with you guys. A little bit about our life. It's not all roses and sunshine. There are definite drawbacks to living as a nomad. There are definite benefits to living as a nomad. It's not for everybody. I think many people would not have any desire to live like we live. And many more people say that they would, but they're not willing to do the sacrifices, do the hard part to get to enjoy the nomadic part that they might like. But for some people that are actually considering it, may actually do it. Hopefully, this was helpful. This nomadic journey of ours, right? Blessings are meant to be shared. If I can share a little bit of our lifestyle with you guys, even if you don't even have a desire to do it, but especially if you do, maybe you find it helpful, fascinating, whatever the case might be. Kind of a different episode. I did one a while back, the last time we lived in Idaho. My wife and I, we did one. I think I've rebroadcast it since then. But my wife and I, she was on here with me, so you might want to look that up. If go back to the feed and search for that. My wife actually came on and talked. But hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Again, kind of a freeform discussion, but sometimes you guys like that. No notes, no nothing like that. Just being real with you guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I don't know what I was expecting out of it. I don't know what you were expecting out of it, but I hope you liked it. I am very humbled that you guys tune in to listen. If this wasn't your cup of tea, hopefully next time there'll be something cooler that you guys are into if you didn't dig this episode. Anyway, if you guys want to support the show, I consider this Alpha Male podcast primarily a men's ministry. I don't apologize for that. I don't take Jesus out of it. In fact, God and Jesus should be at the center of everything that I do, and this podcast is no different. If you want to help support the podcast, the ministry, and I'm going to be real with you guys, support me, right? The reason you get so much content and so frequently, both here and Gunfighter Life, because I do this as a job. And a laborer is worthy of his wages. You shall not muzzle the ox while it treads out the grain. If you want to help support the ministry, and to be real, if you want to help support me, I could use your help. I could use your help. Consider becoming a patron. There should be a Patreon link in the show note. If you don't want to be a patron, there's also just a link for Venmo. Also, completely kind of unrelated to that, but I did an audio book for kids. I made an audio book for kids. It's free. It's free probably where you're listening to this, or free on Audible. It's a free audio book for kids on gender confusion. For the crazy times that we live in, I can't believe that it's a thing that is needed, but I think that it is. And it's a book made for kids on gender confusion. It's called Johnny Was an Oak. It's kind of a story about gender told in a parable of a forest garden setting. But anyway, Johnny Was an Oak. If you think that might benefit somebody that you know, it's free. But things like that, if you want to support, and don't feel like you have to, if you don't, you can listen for free and don't feel guilty about it. But if you want to support, again, anyway, there'll be a link to that in the show notes if you want to be a patron. And patrons get some cool insider content, but mostly I want you to do it because you want to support the podcast. But just like, obviously I'm a prepper, I'm into preparedness. We find some pretty awesome bug out locations. I just did several backcountry bug outs in the wilderness and in the backcountry. And not just there, but all over the country, I've posted actual bug out locations. I share my actual bug out locations with the tribe, with the patrons. Right? They're just one small thing. Like I give you actual GPS coordinates. It's just one small thing on Patreon. Anyway, with that, the tactical tip of the day. Let's do one on living as a neo-nomad. If you like the kind of stuff that I like, that means you probably like Bass Pro Shop. Some Bass Pro Shops, especially out west, have campgrounds on them, and they have places for RVs. Some of them even have RV hookups. So if you're traveling, I wouldn't advise living there for like weeks or months at a time. But if you're traveling, a lot of those are on major routes. So if you're looking for a place to stop for a day or two, you want to stay at a rest stop or whatever, and you like Bass Pro Shop anyway, and you want a place to walk around in, especially if the weather's really bad, right? Bass Pro Shops, again, some of them actually have hookups with electricity and power and things like that. So if you're on a really long, road trip, like we were trying to get my wife back because we were running behind schedule to get back to her family in Michigan for Thanksgiving, and you want just some place to stop. Sometimes even have showers and shower facilities. So that's a really good tip. If you're looking for a place to stop, a place to park, even if you're just going to park overnight where you don't have to worry about getting in trouble or things like that, check out and see if the Bass Pro Shop has those kind of facilities. Might not do that on like the south side of Chicago if they have one there, but in a lot of places, especially out west, it's a good viable option and a good tactical tip if you live as a neo-nomad, or if you're just on a long road trip. You don't live as a neo-nomad, you're just on a long road trip. That is a good tip there, I think. With that, I'm going to give you again that verse from Hebrews. For they all declared plainly that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For if they had been mindful of the country from whence they came, they may have been permitted to return. But as it were, they sought a better country, a heavenly country, where God would not be ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. Comment. Remember, you are an eternal being. This is a temporary situation. Be mindful of more. You are made for more. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.